Oh, wonderful. Well, welcome to A Little Bit More Podcast. Lee, Kevin here, and happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
It was a great weekend. It's always such an interesting weekend because we have the most polar opposite styles of services that I plan. You know, we plan these out, and Good Friday has to be so just down and low-key and reflective and it's really sad. I mean, like, we're just doing a lot of processing about what Jesus did for us, and we remember the great sacrifice. And then Easter Sunday is boom, party.
Yeah.
Let's turn it all the way up. Have a great, so it's always interesting as a worship leader to plan both those services in the same weekend.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And I think also those of us who have grown up in this tradition, have grown up in the church, the easiest thing for us to do is to get ahead of the narrative. And we don't sit in the places in which God wants us to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And so this year we did what's called a Seder meal, which Jewish people do after the temple had fallen. Not that their hope was in Jesus, but they were creating this space for order and for remembrance of what had happened through the Promised Land, but also what happened in Egypt. Mm-hmm. So there's all these remembering pieces.
Yeah.
And so I think the Jewish people do a really good job of remembering, but I think us as evangelicals or as Christians, followers of Christ, we have a hard time of remembering and not getting ahead of the narrative.
Yeah. It's sort of funny you said that because I was just talking to somebody this morning. We were talking about, am I going to see you Friday or Sunday? He's like, yeah, I'll definitely be there Sunday, but I don't know if you see me Friday. It's sort of a downer service. I was like, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
But you can't have Easter Sunday and the joy of that without Good Friday.
Yeah. You have to almost train yourself. It's a discipline of not getting ahead of the narrative. And I think that's part of sitting in what the depth of the sacrifice of Jesus. I think if we get ahead of the narrative, it cheapens what Christ has done for us and the sacrifice that as he's provided.
Especially the longer you're a Christian and year after year you celebrate Easter,
yeah.
you can sometimes lose sight of that's why it's so important for us to read through those scriptures. It's intentional. We go through the whole story on Good Friday to remember those parts of the story that aren't pleasant to read.
Right.
The depth and level of persecution and pain and agony he went through leading up to the cross even. Yeah. It wasn't just on the cross. That was horrific in itself, but all that stuff that he went through leading up to the cross.
Yeah, so this Easter we decided to do a bit of a different passage than normal. Mm-hmm. Once again, it's to make the familiar unfamiliar to yourself, to see it from a different perspective. And so we looked at what Paul talked about when he talks about Jesus. And remember, Paul, who was going by Saul, someone who would have not considered him a follower. He wouldn't have considered himself a follower of Jesus until there was this experience that he had. But he writes in his letter that says, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. And it's interesting that, Paul begins to talk about, and he begins to frame this out, that he is the first fruit or the first fruits of what is to come. And that language is used a lot in the Old Testament. You and I have talked about this before, but it's the idea of how we should be generous, is that we would give our first fruits. We wouldn't give, if I was drinking a cup of coffee and I offered you the first sip or the last sip, which one would you be more willing to take?
No doubt about it. I ain't taking your last sip.
Yeah, you're not taking the last sip.
Yeah.
The first fruits is the very top. It's the best. It's the best part. Like if you're drinking a latte, it's the cream on top that is it's the best part. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the first fruits is. It's not only the best part, but it's also the hope of what is to come.
Yeah, the leftovers is not a gift.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird to say or talk about Jesus in this way, but he's the prototype for what is to come. He is the example of what a resurrected life is going to look like. It's the hope in which we have. And so what Paul is saying, indeed this has happened. He is the first fruits of this all taking place. And guys, this is what you get to look forward to in the future, that the experience in which the disciples had when Jesus came back and they saw the resurrected Christ, that is which we will experience. But only through the power of Christ's blood, the sacrifice, and now the Spirit dwelling within us. But then Paul goes on to talk about this contrast that I'm not sure that we always understand. I don't know that I always understand the difference of the contrast in which Paul is giving. He talks about Adam, and then he talks about Jesus. He talks about that he is the second Adam, that Jesus is the second Adam. That Adam was created in God's image, and that he was supposed to co-labor with God. And then you have God. Jesus is not a created being. He's always been. He was there. He was there before creation. He was there during creation, and he still is. But he is the second Adam who had to come to earth. So from death, we mess this thing up, and death is what will restore, which is kind of ironic. And so Adam was separated from God because of the decisions that were made, and Jesus brought it back together through the sacrifice, which also had to lead to death. So it was interesting. I quoted this on Sunday, but Isaac Steiner came and spoke at GSM Reach,
which was an incredible event, by the way.
Yeah, it was amazing.
High school students around the church and ask them about it. It was an incredible night.
So it's really cool when past students can teach you something or make you pause. So Isaac was in my youth group. He's up in Grand Rapids, Michigan now as a pastor. And when he was preaching, he shared a very profound thing that made me stop in my tracks. I had to take a note on it. And he said that the world and Jesus promise the same thing. The difference is that Jesus follows through with his promises. And to me, a light bulb went on and go, that's why we chase after the world. It's because it seems so real.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like something that it seems like...
The commercials are enticing.
Yeah, that my life will be perfect if I do this, if I say this, whatever. And that's exactly what is happening in 1 Corinthians. That Adam, who was enticed to have a different life that he was already living. If you eat this, you will not die. You will be like God. The irony is that he already was like God because he was made in God's image. So he was being sold something that he already had.
Yeah. Sidebar, one of the greatest jobs I think Adam had was naming animals.
Yeah.
I think that would have been so fun.
Yeah, he did a pretty good job. Like platypus, that's awesome.
What was that in the original tongue?
I don't know. I wish I knew. Maybe I'll look that up.
We'll know one day.
Yeah. And we talked about this little goofy story.
Yeah, this is cool.
If you missed on Sunday, my wife and I we used to flip things on eBay. I'm kind of a nerd. I love 90s stuff, so I love Star Wars.
It's a great decade.
I love I know I might get kicked off this podcast for this, but I like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers and those types of things. Like I'm just kind of a nerd when it comes to that stuff. But so when we were flipping stuff, one of my favorite things to flip was toys because it kind of like relived my childhood. Well, actually Max went with me. There was this guy in Fort Wayne, like downtown Fort Wayne, that was selling all these things. He put it up on Facebook Marketplace, all these action figures, all these Star Wars action figures. So I bought this whole lot for, a couple $100, and I was like, man, I can make some serious money off this. I would put a little work into it.
There's valuable toys.
Yeah, I had to, put a little work into it. But so I'm going through the toys when I got them home. I didn't want to take them in the house. I wanted to make sure they were clean, all that stuff. So I'm cleaning them in the garage, and I pulled this action figure out. And as soon as I did, I knew exactly what I was looking at. That this is from the 70s, and it's one of the original toys.
In the packaging.
Which is a
whole other level.
And so I'm literally shaking. And Jana was inside. This was before we had kids. I walk in, I go, Jana, I know you may not know what I'm holding, but I'm holding an original Luke Skywalker. And this thing can go anywhere from $2,000. Like I've seen crazy sales from like $8,000 on eBay. And so I was so pumped. I quickly was taking pictures. I loaded it up on eBay, all this stuff. But then there was something that just seemed a little off. So if you look really closely, you can even see it's coming apart at the top here. And the coloring wasn't quite right on some of the printing. Even around the plastic that it hooks to the cardboard, it's not right.
Wow.
The coloring of the hair of Luke isn't right. And so I realized that it was a bootleg figure.
Because it's close. I mean, they even had the copyright stuff down here.
It's super illegal, whoever did that. But I couldn't get rid of it. I was like, man, this is cool. People may think that I have a real one, so I'm just going to keep it. I didn't even, even if someone wanted to buy it from me, I didn't want to get rid of it because I'm like, it represents something that's real. But I say all that that's exactly what the world sells us. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the difference between an empty promise and an empty tomb. And it's interesting that a tomb represents death, but that's exactly what we had to walk through by the power of God, the resurrection. We couldn't have walked through that grave. If we walk in the grave, we're not walking out. Mm-hmm. The only way we can walk through that empty tomb is by the Spirit of God, by the resurrection power. But the world wants to sell us this bootleg version of this promised world. Mm-hmm. And time again, from Genesis all the way through the New Testament, we are continuing to fight against the bootleg version. Mm-hmm. You look at, you going back to the Promised Land, they would have rather died in the desert than go to the Promised Land. Mm. I'd rather have my grave here than continue forward.
Because this is known.
This is known, this is unknown.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what comes down to our faith too. We keep talking about don't have faith in your faith, but have faith in God's faithfulness. That is true faith. Mm-hmm. But the reason that is true faith is because we actually have to believe what God did and what God is going to do. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we would rather take the concrete, so we will have faith in our faith. We'll have faith in the known entities rather than the unknown entities. Mm-hmm. And that's where the bootleg comes in. We want to be like, man, I can see it. I know it. That's the real deal. But in reality, it's not.
Yeah.
And so, man, that's why I was so encouraged, as we were walking through Easter. And I keep this I keep this in my office now.
As a great reminder.
As a reminder of the bootleg that the world is trying to sell us. And that's the series that we're going into. Is about embracing the Great Commission.
Nice.
What does it look like to embrace the calling, the real version? So there's power in the resurrection, but the story doesn't stop there. If it stopped there, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Right. We would have been zapped up to glory. But that's not where it stops. We are living out. We're building the kingdom that God has called us to. And it's this living organism known as the church. It's not a place. It's not a location. It's not a place on Google Map. It is this active, mobilized group of people that are living out this Great Commission. And so we're going to begin to talk about what does it look like to have an authentic faith, not a bootleg version of it, not just a Sunday morning faith, but a Monday through Saturday faith. And honestly, we're going to talk about some of the differences about how Moses led versus how Joshua led, and how Joshua just didn't lead up the next generation.
Okay. That's cool, man. I'm pumped about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot since we talked about this in planning meeting about what it means to have good news. Like if you have good news about something, you can't wait to share it. Like if you find out you guys are pregnant or something, you can't wait to tell people. Yeah. And yet as Christians, we oftentimes shy away from the good news that we have of Jesus. Yeah. And we get embarrassed about it or shameful about it. I don't know what it is. It's just something inside of us, like people are going to judge us or think we're weird, or maybe we're afraid of rejection. Yeah. But that whole term good news has just been really pumped in my mind. Yeah. Like we have good news to share. Let's get out there and do it.
I've been asked before, how do you know that Jesus rose from the dead? I said, well, there's a lot of interesting pieces in the gospel that tell me that it's true just based on his followers. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So you look at the disciples before Jesus died, they were doubtful. They were kind of cowards at times. Mm-hmm. They didn't always believe that Jesus was going to do what he said he was going to do, or he was who he said he was. Mm-hmm. Then he dies, and he's raised from the dead. They have all this confidence, and they're willing to die. Mm-hmm. They're willing to suffer for what they saw. You would not be willing to suffer for a lie. I don't know a group of people in history that would be willing to suffer for a lie. If anything, they would cower back and get off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to know if the resurrection of Jesus was true, look at the disciples of how their transition happened before his death and after his death.
Yeah.
And, look at Stephen's story. Look at how disciples were literally crucified upside down.
Oh, yeah.
How they, were stoned, persecuted, all these things. They were willing to suffer because of the truth of the resurrection. Paul actually kind of almost boasts about all the things that he has to go through.
Yeah.
Because he goes, but I did it for Christ.
That's awesome.
So it's really, really interesting.
I'm looking forward to this series. It's going to be really great.
Yeah.
So, are you a big fan of Easter candy?
I am a huge fan of Easter candy.
Here,
yes.
Have some Easter candy on me.
Are you kidding me?
It's delicious.
Talking about it.
Gotcha.
Talking about empty promises.
Empty. I'm not a jerk, though, so here's some real candy.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I just thought this was so intriguing when I saw the title of our Easter was empty, because most of the time when you say, hey, it's empty, that's a wah.
Yeah.
But for the tomb being empty,
that's the irony of it, right? The emptiness is the fullness of what Christ provides.
Yeah, so we're not giving out empty bags of candy. We're giving out the good news of the empty tomb. Yeah. We're going to celebrate that for the rest of this year. We want to keep that joy that we celebrated yesterday on Easter with us from now on. So there's a little bit more.
There's a little bit more. Have a great week.
Enjoy your Easter candy.